Her name was Evelyn. She was 68, a widow, a mother, a woman who had spent her life putting everyone else first. And one quiet Thursday evening, as the rain tapped against her kitchen window, her daughter, grown, weary, watching, looked at her and softly said, "Mom, I don't want to end up like you." The words sliced through the silence like a blade. Evelyn smiled, but inside, something broke. Not out of anger, but because for the first time she realized her daughter saw what she had been trying to ignore for decades. That she had become invisible in her own life. Loved, perhaps, but never valued. Needed, yet never nurtured. Always giving, but rarely receiving. She had raised a family, served a husband, held down jobs, cooked endless meals, comforted everyone else's pain, but never her own. She had mistaken self-sacrifice for strength, and she had done it for so long she forgot she was a person too, a person with needs, with dreams, with value. Evelyn didn't cry that night, but she didn't sleep either. Instead, she stayed up wondering, how did I become this version of me? Where did I start believing that I didn't matter, and why did I let it go on for so long? But here's the truth, Evelyn, and maybe you needed to hear. Being a low-value woman has nothing to do with age, wrinkles, or wealth. It's about how much you respect yourself, how you let others treat you, how you show up, or don't, for your own soul. This video isn't here to judge, it's here to awaken. It's for every woman who's ever felt unseen, and every man who's ever loved a woman like Evelyn and didn't know how to help her rise. Because it's never too late, not at 40, not at 60, not even at 80. And these 16 signs, they might just be the mirror you or someone you love needs to finally begin again. Let's begin. 1. She over-apologizes for existing. You hear her before you see her. She enters a room and says, "Sorry, I'm late," even if she's on time. She offers an idea in a conversation, then quickly adds, "Sorry if that sounds stupid." She bumps into a chair and apologizes to the chair. This isn't politeness, it's a quiet cry. Because when a woman apologizes for speaking, for being visible, for existing, she's not expressing humility, she's apologizing for being alive in her own skin. Somewhere along the way, life taught her that she was an inconvenience, that her voice was too loud, her feelings were too much, her needs were always second or last. And now she's mastered the art of shrinking herself, in conversations, in relationships, in her own mind. It's not that she's weak. She's been strong for far too long, strong in silence, strong in surrender. But what she doesn't see is that this chronic apology is no longer about manners. It's become a ritual of self-erasure. And here's the question. What happens when kindness turns into quiet submission? What does it cost a woman when she forgets how to stand her sacred ground? The next sign reveals how losing your boundaries can disguise itself as being easy to love. But is she really loved if she has to disappear to keep the peace? 2. She seeks validation from the wrong places. She checks her phone again, still nothing. He reads her message but left it unanswered. Her heart drops, but she tells herself, maybe he's just busy. She changes her outfit 3 times before a family gathering, wondering what they'll think. She posts a photo online, then stares at the screen, hoping for likes, hearts, some small digital proof that she matters. You see, when a woman doesn't know her own worth, she starts looking for it in other people's eyes, in lovers who breadcrumb her, in friends who don't celebrate her, in strangers who never truly see her. She builds her sense of self on shifting sand, never knowing who she is unless someone else approves. But here's the tragedy. The people she's trying to impress, they often don't deserve a front-row seat to her soul. Yet she hands them the key to her self-esteem, hoping, aching that this time she'll finally be enough. And every time she's ignored, ghosted, or criticized, it confirms the story she secretly believes, that she is only as good as someone else's opinion. But what happens when a woman spends so long performing for applause that she forgets how to speak for herself? The next sign dives even deeper into the silence that grows when a woman stops expressing her truth and starts pretending that silence is strength. But is it? 3. So she silences her true voice. She bites her tongue again, not because she has nothing to say, but because she's learned that speaking her truth often comes at a cost. A slammed door, and swallows words that once burned to be heard. This is the silence of survival. The silence of a woman who has been told, explicitly or through experience, that her feelings are too much, that her needs make her difficult, that her boundaries are selfish. So she begins to edit herself, softening her tone, diluting her dreams, and little by little erasing the sound of her own soul. People say she's easygoing. She's so accommodating, so low maintenance. But what they don't see is the pressure cooker underneath her smile, the resentment that simmers when she's praised for her silence, but punished for her honesty. She doesn't rock the boat anymore, not because the water is calm, but because she's afraid she'll drown in it. So she sacrifices peace with herself to maintain a false peace with others. But here's the quiet tragedy. Real peace never comes from pretending to be okay, pretending not to care, pretending that the little cuts don't bleed. And eventually, if a woman silences herself long enough, she forgets what her real voice even sounds like. She becomes a stranger in her own life. And the saddest part? Most people never notice the silence because she trained them not to. But what happens when that silence turns into servitude? When her giving is no longer a gift, but a prison she's built with her own hands? Let's talk about that next. Oh. She gives endlessly without boundaries. Evelyn was the first to rise and the last to sleep. Breakfast was hot before anyone was awake. Groceries stocked, beds made, bills paid, birthdays remembered, even the ungrateful ones. She was the invisible engine that kept everything running. And yet, no one ever asked, "Mom, are you okay?" Because she never said no, never paused, never asked for help. She wore her giving like a badge of honor, until it became a burden stitched into her spine. She told herself it was love. But really, it was fear. Fear of being seen as selfish. Fear that if she stopped giving, she'd stop being needed. And if she wasn't needed, what was she even worth? Because somewhere along the line, someone taught her that good women give, that strong women endure, that no is a dirty word, and rest is weakness in disguise. But let's be honest, what looks like devotion on the outside can quietly become self-neglect on the inside. When you give so much that there's nothing left for you, that's not generosity. That's a slow unraveling of your own spirit. Boundaries aren't walls, they are bridges back to yourself. They say, "I matter too." They remind your children, your partner, your friends, that love should never cost you your health, your sleep, or your soul. And yet, so many women like Evelyn don't set boundaries, not because they're weak, but because no one ever showed them how. But here's the quiet danger. When a woman gives until she disappears, it's not just her that suffers. It's everyone who's learned to take her for granted. So what happens when the people around her start to mirror that same disregard? She tolerates disrespect. It starts small. A sarcastic comment at dinner, a joke at her expense that leaves a sting. He calls her too sensitive when she flinches. Her friends roll their eyes when she speaks. She smiles. She lets it go. Because she doesn't want to seem dramatic. But what seems like letting it go is often letting herself go bit by bit. Every time she allows someone to speak down to her, every time she accepts being interrupted, dismissed, overlooked, she reinforces a silent truth. That's all I'm worth. Disrespect, when tolerated long enough, becomes a language, and the more fluent people become in speaking it to her, the harder it becomes for her to remember that she ever deserved more, because she's taught them, without meaning to, that there are no consequences for treating her less than human. Maybe she didn't grow up with respect. Maybe she was told love had to hurt. So when it does, it feels familiar. It feels like home. Evelyn remembered the first time her late husband raised his voice. She was 24. He apologized after, bought her flowers. She forgave him. But it happened again, and again, until his words were no longer loud, they were sharp and worse expected. Disrespect isn't just about what others do. It's about what you allow. And when a woman allows too much for too long, she begins to live in the echo chamber of her own silence, where her value is measured not by who she is, but by how much she can endure. But But here's the truth, respect doesn't start with others, it starts with her. What she tolerates, what she accepts, what she no longer excuses away. But what happens when disrespect doesn't just come from others, but from within herself? When the mind becomes its own enemy? The next sign will open your eyes because this one lives quietly inside us all. She's addicted to fixing others. Evelyn had a gift. She could sense pain in others before they even spoke it. Her husband was angry, she made excuses for him. Her son was cold, she tried harder to please. Her sister was always in crisis, Evelyn dropped everything to help. She called it love, but it wasn't love, it was a habit, a compulsion, an identity. You see, a low-value woman doesn't always look broken. Sometimes, she looks like the strongest person in the room, the dependable one, the caregiver, the rescuer. But behind the scenes, she's exhausted from constantly pouring into people who never pour back. She picks up the shattered pieces of everyone else's life, while hers remains neglected, scattered across forgotten corners of herself. Why does she do it? Because she believes love has to be earned. That if she's useful enough, needed enough, then maybe, just maybe, she'll be loved in return. But fixing others is a distraction, a way to avoid the real work, fixing the parts of herself she's long ignored. Evelyn never cried in front of others. She prided herself on being the strong one. But strength isn't always healing, sometimes it's just another mask. Because when you fix everyone else but yourself, you're not healing the world. You're bleeding quietly into it, and the tragedy, most of the people you're saving wouldn't even notice if you disappeared. There's a difference between being loving and being lost in others. And the woman who can't stop fixing everyone around her is often trying to avoid fixing the emptiness within. But what does she hide from herself? What pain has she buried so deeply, even though she can't name it? In the next sign, we'll go beneath the surface, to the place where self-worth quietly dies. 7. She hides her pain behind a smile. Evelyn's smile was a well-worn mask. She had perfected it over the years, tight-lipped at the grocery store when the weight of her grief threatened to surface. A cheerful greeting to her friends, even though she hadn't had a full night's sleep in weeks. Her son would call and she'd laugh as if her heart wasn't breaking from the distance. She became so good at hiding that even she began to believe the lie. But here's the truth. A smile can hide many things. It can hide exhaustion, rejection, loneliness. It can cover bruises that no one can see. It can protect us from a world that might not understand or care. But here's the catch. Emotional suppression doesn't protect you, it suffocates you. Because the longer she hides her pain, the deeper it burrows inside her, untouched, unhealed. Evelyn had been through so much loss, betrayal, heartbreak, but she didn't let anyone see. Her own mother had told her when she was young, "Don't cry, Evelyn, you have to be strong." And so she became strong on the outside. But the strength she showed was never for herself. It was for others. No one ever knew how much Evelyn carried. She never asked for help. She never expressed her sorrow. She hid it behind a smile, a mask she wore so long that one day she forgot what it was like to let it all out. She was convinced that the world would stop spinning if she ever cracked, so she kept everything locked inside. But hiding pain doesn't make it go away. It makes it fester. It makes it grow into something insidious, something that slowly erodes the soul. Every time Evelyn smiled, she was telling herself, "It's okay, I can handle this." But deep down, her mind and body were screaming, "Help me." But no one could hear her because she had built walls too thick. She couldn't feel the cracks anymore. The truth is, emotional suppression is the silent killer of self-worth. It makes a woman feel invisible, even in a crowded room. And the longer she goes without expressing her pain, the more she begins to believe that her pain is not worth sharing, that her tears are a burden. Evelyn's smile had become her shield. But the longer she hid her pain behind it, the more she forgot who she really was behind the mask. And when there's no self-worth left to protect her, something else takes its place. What happens when the mask finally cracks? What happens when she can't hide her hurt any longer? Keep watching, because the next sign will leave you in awe of what comes next. She settles for less repeatedly. Evelyn never asked for much. In fact, she had stopped asking for anything at all. Her needs, her desires, they seemed to fade into the background of her life. She had spent years prioritizing others' happiness over her own, so long that it became second nature. She began to believe deep down that she didn't deserve better. It was easier to settle than to fight for what she truly wanted. But here's the painful truth. When you settle for less, life settles for you. Evelyn's relationships had become a reflection of this mindset. Her marriage, which once held the promise of love and partnership, had become an endless cycle of compromise. Only her compromises. She had stayed with someone who didn't truly see her worth, someone who took without giving. And the dreams she once had, the things that made her heart sing, they were locked away in the dusty corners of her mind, covered by the daily grind of just getting by. She had convinced herself that this was enough, that she should be grateful for what she had even if it wasn't what she really wanted. Because somewhere over the years she had stopped believing that she was worthy of more. But what happens when a woman's dreams are no longer her own? What happens when the person she is in the world doesn't reflect the person she once imagined herself to be? She doesn't even recognize the dreams she left behind. Evelyn would sit at her kitchen table in the evening staring out the window, wishing for something more, something brighter. She dreamed of traveling, of painting, of starting that small business she had always imagined. But she never made those dreams happen. She told herself it was too late, that those things were for younger people or that life had simply passed her by. She stayed in her comfort zone, surrounded by familiarity, but inside there was a quiet longing. The longing for a life she could have lived, but had settled out of fear, out of habit, and out of a belief that she wasn't worthy of anything different. This is the trap of settling. You tell yourself you're content, you convince yourself that everything is fine, but somewhere deep inside there's a voice whispering, "There's more for you, if you'd only believe it." And that voice, like a soft wind, begins to fade the longer you ignore it. Evelyn's life wasn't terrible. In many ways it was good. But it wasn't the life she'd dreamed of. And as she aged, that feeling of settling became more pronounced. Her body grew tired, her spirit a little weaker. But the most painful thing? She had stopped believing she deserved more. She had accepted good enough and convinced herself that it was enough to be loved, to be wanted, to just exist. But here's the truth. You cannot live the life you deserve when you keep settling for less. You cannot fulfill your destiny when you constantly shrink yourself to fit in spaces that are too small for you. You were made for more than just surviving. You were made for thriving. And that starts with the hardest thing of all, believing you are worthy of more. It's never too late to stop settling. Evelyn could still turn her life around. Her dreams were still within reach. But first, she had to stop believing the lie that she didn't deserve to have them. But what happens when you stop settling for less? What does the future look like when you finally break free from the chains of self-doubt? Hold on tight, because in the next sign we'll talk about the biggest shift you can make in your life. She fears being alone, more than being unhappy. Evelyn had always been afraid of silence. She had learned to fear the stillness, the quiet moments when no one was around to distract her from herself. She had been surrounded by people her entire life, her family, her friends, her work, and for so long she never had to face the raw reality of being alone. But the truth was, she didn't fear loneliness as much as she feared what she might find in the silence. What would she discover if she finally looked in the mirror and saw only herself? So she stayed, even when her relationships drained her. Even when the person she loved no longer saw her, no longer treated her as someone precious. Evelyn's heart ached with the weight of it all, but the thought of being by herself, the isolation, the empty evenings, the quiet spaces, felt like a mountain too high to climb. The familiar chaos, the noise, even the disrespect, at least they filled the silence, and so she stayed. She chose to endure the pain, the mistreatment, because at least it wasn't alone. But here's the painful irony. In staying for the sake of avoiding solitude, Evelyn only found herself more alone than ever. Her spirit, exhausted from being ignored, her body weary from the constant giving, began to feel like a shell of the woman she used to be. The noise around her could never drown out the silent scream of her own soul, crying out for peace, for real connection, for her own space. She had built a life, a home, even a family, around the idea that being alone was the worst thing she could be. But in doing so, she lost touch with the one person she could always count on, herself. And that is the tragedy of fearing loneliness more than unhappiness. She had allowed herself to be consumed by the idea that being alone was an unbearable curse. But what happens when that fear of being alone takes root deep inside? Evelyn began to settle for less because she couldn't bear the thought of going through life on her own. But the reality? Solitude is not the enemy. What she needed and what most of us need is not to be surrounded by noise, by distractions, by people who do not truly care for us. What we need is the courage to stand alone long enough to reclaim our power. The power that comes from knowing who we are, without the need for validation from others. But Evelyn couldn't see this. Not yet. So she stayed, in the fear of losing connection with others, and she missed out on the most important connection, the one with herself. But what if fear of loneliness isn't the true enemy? What if the true obstacle lies in something else entirely? The next sign will challenge everything you think you know about your own fears. It might just change your entire perspective on how to stop settling and start living. 10. She diminishes her accomplishments. Evelyn's life had been a mosaic of quiet victories. She had raised a family, built a career, held friendships that lasted decades, and even weathered loss with grace. But when it came time to celebrate her accomplishments, there was no grand acknowledgement. It was always, oh, it was nothing, or anyone could have done it. Her triumphs, her dedication, her resilience felt insignificant when she spoke of them. She had learned over the years that drawing attention to her success made others uncomfortable, so she shrank. She became smaller in her own eyes to avoid the discomfort of standing tall in a world that often preferred her to remain modest, quiet, unnoticed. Evelyn didn't want to make anyone feel inferior. She believed that by diminishing her greatness she was being humble. But humility is not about denying your worth. Humility is about knowing your worth and choosing not to boast. But Evelyn's version of humility was dangerous. By saying, it's nothing, she was telling the world and herself that her hard work, her dedication, her sacrifices didn't matter. And by doing this, she robbed herself of the recognition she deserved. When was the last time you celebrated something you did? For many, especially women like Evelyn, the answer is simple: never. In her mind, to accept praise, to stand tall in her accomplishments felt like an act of arrogance. So she preferred to shrink, to diminish herself so that others wouldn't feel less than. But the cost was higher than she realized. The more she shrank, the smaller she became in her own heart, and the more she diminished her worth, the more the world continued to see her as small. This shrinking is a theme that most women know all too well. It's in the way they say it was nothing after completing something monumental. It's in the way they belittle their own struggles and triumphs, hiding their strength behind a veil of self-deprecation. But here's the truth. When you shrink your accomplishments, you shrink your entire life. And while others may accept the version of you that is small, you are the one who lives with the regret of not being seen in your full light. The thing about shrinking is that it's never just about not celebrating yourself. It's about how you begin to disappear from your own story. When you shrink your accomplishments, you also begin to shrink your dreams. And in that silence, in that self-neglect, a dangerous pattern is born. But what happens when shrinking becomes a way of life? What does that look like in the long term? Well, there's more to uncover, and it might just challenge everything you know about the choices you've been making. Stay with me, because the next sign reveals where this shrinking leads, and it's something no one should ever ignore. 11. She's afraid to dream big. Evelyn used to have dreams, big ones. She imagined a future filled with possibilities, goals she hadn't even dared to name yet. She wanted to travel the world, write a book, maybe even open her own small cafe by the beach. She had fire, passion, hope, but somewhere along the way, life took its toll. Her dreams started to feel more like distant memories, and then one day someone told her that her dreams were too big, too unrealistic. It was a simple comment, made with the best of intentions, but it stuck with her like a weight around her neck. It wasn't the first time someone had questioned her dreams. It was the slow accumulation of doubt, the quiet voices of "you're too old now" or "it's too late to start that." And so Evelyn, the woman who once saw the world as a playground, began to see it through a lens of limitation. She began to doubt the very essence of her desires. She told herself that her dreams were for the younger version of her, not for this stage in life. Slowly but surely, the fire that once burned brightly inside her was reduced to mere embers. She stopped thinking about what could be and started thinking about what was, and what was felt, well, good enough. But here's the truth, and it's one that Evelyn and so many others don't fully understand. When we stop dreaming, we stop living. Dreams are not just fantasies. They are the essence of who we are at our core. They keep us alive, motivated, and inspired. When we allow others to define what's realistic for us, we surrender a part of our soul. But it doesn't stop there. Because the moment we stop dreaming big, we also stop daring to live fully. Evelyn's story isn't just about giving up on dreams, it's about giving up on herself. It's about believing the lie that it's too late to strive for greatness. But the thing is, when we stop dreaming, we begin to lose the very essence of our vibrancy. And the deeper damage? It's not just in our dreams. It's in our ability to believe that we are worthy of more. You see, dreaming big isn't just about achieving something monumental. It's about honoring the voice within us that says, I am capable. I am worthy of something greater. And when that voice is silenced, we begin to shrink, just like we did in the last sign. The danger is that this silence leads to an even darker place, one that's often hard to see until it's too late. So, what happens when we stop dreaming? When we allow the world to shape our possibilities and we give up on what once lit a fire in our hearts? The damage goes deeper than we realize. It's not just about giving up on what's possible. It's about how that fear of dreaming transforms us from within. And in the next sign, we're going to see just how far this path can lead. But don't go anywhere, because understanding this is the first step in breaking free from the chains of fear. She believes love must be earned. Evelyn had always felt like she had to work for love. She believed that if she gave enough, did enough, and sacrificed enough, people would love her in return. Her whole life had been an intricate dance of trying to prove her worth, whether it was to her parents, her partners, her friends, or even her children. Love, she thought, wasn't something you simply received. It was something you earned. It started when she was a child. Love was something her parents gave her only after she succeeded in something. Grades, chores, a job well done. The connection was always tied to performance. Evelyn grew up thinking that affection was a reward, not an unconditional gift. And when she became an adult, this belief only deepened. She thought she had to prove herself worthy of love with every new person she met. When Evelyn was younger, she loved deeply, truly, and without reservation. But over time, she learned that love in many of her relationships wasn't unconditional. She would go out of her way to please others, to make them happy, to do things for them that she never asked for in return. She sacrificed pieces of herself, thinking that if she just did enough, if she could just prove she was good enough, love would flow freely toward her. But time and time again, that love seemed to come with strings attached. And when it didn't, when people disappointed her, Evelyn internalized that she wasn't enough. As she got older, the pattern didn't change. Evelyn continued to give everything she had, leaving little for herself. She believed that if she just worked hard enough at being a good person, loved everyone the right way, and put others first, then finally she would be worthy of love. But it never felt like enough. She wasn't getting love back in the way she wanted, and slowly, she began to feel invisible, unimportant. She was a giver, but the more she gave, the less she felt seen. But here's the truth that Evelyn couldn't see at the time. Love isn't something you earn. Love is something that is freely given and freely received. It's unconditional. And it begins with one core belief. I am enough just as I am. Love starts from within, not from the validation of others. When we base our worth on how much we give or what we do for others, we never allow ourselves the space to truly receive love. But when we finally embrace the truth that we don't have to prove ourselves to anyone, we begin to experience the freedom of being loved just for who we are. Evelyn had spent decades thinking that love was something that had to be earned. She tied her worth to her actions, her ability to please, and her willingness to sacrifice. But the moment she stopped measuring her value by what she did for others and instead started valuing herself as she was, flaws and all, everything changed. She realized that the love she had been seeking from others was always waiting for her within herself. That was the turning point. And this is where it gets powerful, my friend. The moment we stop believing that love has to be earned, we begin to create a life where love flows freely and abundantly. Because love starts with us. When we believe in our own worth, we become magnetic. We attract healthy, authentic love, not the kind that's conditional or transactional. But the road to this realization isn't always clear. There's a reason many of us have been conditioned to think that love must be earned. And in the next sign, we'll see how this belief affects even deeper aspects of life and the price we pay when we fail to change this mindset. Keep watching because this pattern is far-reaching, and the next truth I'll uncover could be the key to your transformation. 13. She avoids conflict at all costs. Evelyn had always been the one to smooth things over. When tension rose, when voices got loud, or when uncomfortable truths were about to be revealed, Evelyn's instinct was clear. Avoid. Avoid the fight. Avoid the discomfort. She hated conflict more than anything. So instead of standing up for herself, she swallowed her words, muffled her feelings, and smiled through the discomfort, convincing herself that peace was just around the corner if she could only keep things calm. But here's the thing. Peace at the expense of truth isn't peace, it's performance. It's a show we put on to make everyone else feel comfortable while we hide our own discomfort. Evelyn knew something was wrong, but she thought that if she could just keep the peace, everything would settle. But it didn't. It never did. The peace she was chasing wasn't real, it was fragile, paper thin. Every time she kept quiet, she silently told herself that her voice didn't matter, her needs didn't matter, and her truth was something to hide. It didn't matter if her heart was aching or her mind was filled with resentment. As long as the exterior looked calm, Evelyn could convince herself that everything was fine. But what happens when we constantly silence ourselves to keep the peace? What happens when we abandon our truth for the sake of others' comfort? The answer is that we lose ourselves. We lose our sense of who we really are, and we begin to live a life that isn't ours. Conflict is uncomfortable, yes. It's messy, it's challenging. But conflict also creates clarity. It brings us closer to understanding both of ourselves and others. Without it, we exist in a fog of unspoken truths and unresolved feelings, pretending everything is fine when it's anything but. The cost of avoiding conflict is far greater than the momentary discomfort it brings. When Evelyn avoided the difficult conversations, she lost her ability to assert herself. She became a doormat in relationships, allowing others to walk all over her without saying a word. Over time, her boundaries crumbled. She didn't know how to say no, and she certainly didn't know how to stand up for herself when it really mattered. And here's the kicker. The more we avoid conflict, the more we teach the world that we don't have a voice. We teach people to walk all over us, to take us for granted. But when we finally decide to speak up, when we choose to embrace conflict, not as something to fear, but as an opportunity for growth, that's when we truly reclaim our power. It's not about being confrontational or aggressive. It's about being honest with ourselves and others. When we express our true feelings, our true needs, we stop living in a constant state of self-betrayal. We stop pretending, and for the first time, we begin to experience true peace. Not the fragile, superficial kind, but the deep, authentic kind that comes from honoring our truth. But avoiding conflict is just one piece of the puzzle, and while it may seem like a harmless defense mechanism, it leads to something even more damaging, something that, once ingrained, becomes one of the most destructive beliefs a woman can carry. And that brings us to the next sign. Stay with me, because the next truth might just shake everything you thought you knew about your worth. 14. She believes she's too old to change. Evelyn sat alone one evening, the weight of her years pressing down on her heart. At 68, she felt like her story had already been written. The chapters were set. The regrets were etched deep into the pages of her life. She thought that who she was, this tired, quiet woman who had spent decades giving and sacrificing, was all there was. It wasn't just the years that had worn her down, but the thought that she was past her prime. After all, wasn't she too old to change? Wasn't the time for transformation long gone? But here's the truth that Evelyn had forgotten. Healing has no expiration date. Change is not bound by age, circumstance, or the calendar on the wall. It's not about waiting for the perfect time. It's about making the decision in that very moment to take control of your own story. At 68, Evelyn thought she had missed her chance. She thought that all the decisions she'd made, all the paths she'd taken, had led her to a life that couldn't be undone. The truth was, she had been living in a cage built by her own limiting beliefs. Beliefs that told her that growth was only for the young, that change was reserved for those with enough time left to start over. But here's the powerful revelation. Those thoughts, they were never the truth. They were just stories she had told herself, stories that needed to be rewritten. The real breakthrough came when Evelyn had an epiphany. Change begins the moment you say no more. Not tomorrow, not next year, not after you retire, but right now. The moment you choose to stop tolerating your own misery and start believing that you deserve more, that's when everything shifts. It doesn't matter how old you are or how many years have passed. If you're still breathing, you still have the power to change. If you're still alive, You can still write new chapters, discover new dreams, and rewrite your narrative. Age doesn't define your potential. Your willingness to change does. For Evelyn, that first step was small but mighty. It wasn't about doing everything at once. It was about finally giving herself permission to dream, to hope, and to take action. She didn't have to have all the answers or a clear roadmap. All she had to do was choose to say no more to a life of silent suffering and yes to the possibility of change. And let me tell you, when that moment comes, when you decide that enough is enough and that you're ready to step into your own power, that moment can be absolutely beautiful. It's the moment when you break free from the stories that held you back and begin the process of reinvention. It's the moment when you realize that your future is still yours to create. Evelyn didn't have to wait for permission, and neither do you. Life can start anew at any age. The only thing you need is the courage to believe in your own ability to change, no matter what your past looks like. The truth is, your most beautiful, empowered chapters might just be the ones you write today. So ask yourself, are you ready to say no more to the life that no longer serves you? Are you ready to begin again? Because when that decision is made, when you choose to step into your power, the transformation that follows might just surprise you. 15. She resents but doesn't release. Evelyn, like so many of us, carried her resentments quietly. It wasn't that she was always angry. No, her anger was more of a heavy, constant ache that lingered just beneath the surface, like a wound that never fully healed. The people who hurt her, her family, her friends, her colleagues, they all had their pieces in this mosaic of pain. And Evelyn, in her exhaustion, had convinced herself that holding on to it made her strong. It was her way of protecting herself, of saying, I won't forget, I won't let them hurt me again. But here's the truth, resentment is not strength, it's a cage of your own making. She resented, yes, but she didn't release it. The grudges were like old friends, familiar and safe, even though they kept her heart locked in a prison. Every time she thought about forgiving, about letting go, she felt a deep weariness rise in her chest. It wasn't that she didn't want to be free, it was just that she had no energy left to fight the battle of forgiveness. She was tired. Tired of trying, tired of feeling hurt, and most of all, tired of carrying this weight alone. Resentment feels like a shield at first. It feels like justice, like a way to ensure that no one ever hurts you again. But in truth, it's a silent killer. Every time Evelyn clung to her anger, she was chaining her own heart. The more she resented, the more tightly she held herself to the past, and the less room she had for peace or happiness in the present. That bitterness, that weight, it doesn't just affect the mind, it bleeds into the body too. Her back ached more, her sleep grew restless, and the once bright light in her eyes dimmed just a little each day. The truth? Resentment is exhausting. But here's where things get different. The moment Evelyn realized that holding on to resentment was not a shield but a chain, that's when the healing began. You see, the moment you choose to forgive isn't about saying that what was done to you was okay. It's about setting yourself free. It's not about excusing the harm or forgetting the pain. It's about releasing the burden that weighs on your heart, allowing yourself to finally take a breath without the weight of the past dragging you down. Forgiveness is freedom, not for the person who hurt you, but for you. It's freedom from the emotional prison you've built for yourself. It's the ability to breathe deeply again without the weight of bitterness clouding every thought. It's about choosing your own peace over the poison of the past. And that peace, it's worth every ounce of strength it takes to release. What happens when you finally let go of resentment? You begin to feel lighter. You feel the tension leave your body, the tightness in your chest loosen, and the sense of being stuck, paralyzed by the past, finally dissipates. It's as if the world opens up before you, and with every deep breath you feel more alive, more whole. The people who hurt you may never change, but your release from their grip can be the most powerful act of self-love you can ever give yourself. When you stop letting resentment hold you hostage, you reclaim your life. You take back your joy, your peace, your sense of self. And that, my friend, is worth everything. But even this freedom, this release, requires one final transformative step, and that step is impossible without the last sign. Stay with me. 16. She doesn't know her own value. For most of her life, Evelyn didn't know her own value. She was a woman who gave, who loved, who worked tirelessly, but always in the background. People would pass by her, take her presence for granted, and she'd simply disappear into the shadows of the people around her. The world, for all its noise, never really saw her. She became a master at hiding her own desires. pushing aside her own needs and only acknowledging her worth through the lens of others. But that's the thing about value. It doesn't come from how others see you. It comes from how you see yourself. You see, Evelyn didn't start off low in value. No woman is born with low value. And that's a label society places on us, a label we take on over time when we're not seen, when we're not heard, when our achievements are overshadowed, when our worth is reduced to what we can do for others, when our voice is stifled and our needs are dismissed. Over years of giving, of sacrificing, of shrinking into the background, Evelyn had unknowingly shaped herself into someone who believed she was invisible, unimportant, and dispensable. She thought her value was determined by others, by how much she could give, how much she could please, how little she could ask for. But here's the truth. No one else gets to decide your value except you. The moment Evelyn realized this was the moment everything shifted. She wasn't just a woman who needed approval. She wasn't a servant, a doormat, or a side character in someone else's story. She was the main character. She was worthy of her own love, respect, and time. And once she saw that, truly saw it, the world could no longer control her sense of self-worth. She didn't need validation from others. She didn't need to shrink herself or give endlessly. She understood her value, not because of anything anyone had done for her or said to her, but because of who she was, just as she was. The most dangerous lie we can believe is that our worth is tied to external validation, our relationships, our careers, our accomplishments, our appearances. But the truth is, your worth is innate. It is not negotiable. It doesn't come from your ability to give, to sacrifice, or to cater to others. Your value exists because you are alive, because you have a unique voice, a unique spirit, and a unique presence that no one else can replicate. The moment Evelyn saw herself clearly, when she truly recognized her worth, she became unstoppable. She stopped apologizing for existing. She stopped hiding. She stopped shrinking into spaces she didn't belong. She became the woman she was meant to be. And this is where it gets beautiful. The moment you see your own value, the world shifts. People will still come to you seeking your time, your energy, your love, but you will know your worth. And you won't settle for anything less than what you deserve. You will demand respect. You will demand love. You will demand space to be yourself unapologetically. And if others can't meet you at that level, you won't hesitate to walk away, because you know deep down that you are not only worthy of better, you are worthy of the best. Evelyn's transformation wasn't about changing who she was. It was about peeling back the layers of self-doubt, the layers of self-erasure, the layers of conditioning that told her she was anything less than magnificent. It was about remembering who she had always been, beneath the noise and the expectations of others. And when she did that, when she truly recognized her worth, her life blossomed in ways she had never imagined. She became unstoppable because she wasn't just living for others anymore. She was living for herself. And you too can have that. You can shed the weight of external validation and finally stand tall in the knowledge that you are enough. Exactly as you are. Once you see your value, the world can never make you small again. It's time for you to stop asking, "Am I good enough?" and start saying, "I am more than enough." Evelyn's journey didn't end with the realization of her value. It was only the beginning. And for you, it can be too. The moment you claim your value, everything will change. Because when you know your worth, the world bows to your brilliance. And that, my friend, is the power of knowing your own value. But what happens after you claim your worth? How do you move forward? And what does it take to keep this momentum going? Evelyn's story didn't end with her daughter's words, it began there. You see, that was the turning point, when everything she had believed about herself shattered and a new chapter began. At 70 years old, when the world had already written off her potential, she found her voice again. She joined a community of like-minded women who knew the pain of hiding their truth, of feeling unseen. They lifted each other up, shared their struggles, and celebrated their growth. And in that space of sisterhood, Evelyn started painting again, something she had abandoned long ago. She rediscovered the joy that had once lit her up inside. She remembered that she was worthy of her own love and of life's beauty. She was not low value, she never was. She just needed to remember who she truly was. And that was the moment her life began again. Maybe you're like Evelyn. Maybe you've spent years giving, loving, and sacrificing, yet never really receiving what you deserve in return. Maybe you've forgotten who you are underneath the layers of self-doubt and exhaustion. But here's the truth. You are not alone, and it's never too late to rewrite your story. You don't have to stay stuck in the narrative that you're not enough. There is power in remembering your worth, and the moment you reclaim it is the moment everything begins to change. You are capable of greatness regardless of your age, your past, or the mistakes you've made. Your value isn't determined by the world's expectations or by the approval of others. Your value is inherent, simply because you exist. If this video spoke to you, if even one of these signs felt familiar, then don't let that be the end. Let it be your beginning. This moment is the spark. It's the first step toward reclaiming your life, your worth, and your voice. Don't wait for permission to be yourself, to love yourself, to be unapologetically you. Like this video to let others know that they're not alone in their struggles. Share it with a sister, a mother, a friend, anyone who needs to hear this message. Someone you love might be holding on to the same silent pain, and your willingness to share could be the key to unlocking their healing too. Subscribe for more honest, soul-deep life advice. Together, we can create a community where vulnerability is celebrated, where women are empowered to reclaim their worth, and where no one feels invisible. But even more importantly, share your story in the comments. What lesson hit home for you today? What have you learned about valuing yourself and reclaiming your power? Your voice matters, and your story might just be the one that helps someone else rise from the ashes of their own doubt and fear. Because this journey isn't just about you, it's about all of us. The more we share our stories, the more we create a ripple effect of healing and strength. When one woman rises, it creates space for others to rise too. That is the highest value of all. Thank you for being here, for allowing this message to touch your soul. Your story is just beginning, and I can't wait to see where it leads. You are worthy. You are enough. And now it's time to live like you believe it.